chosen one. They lied on you to everyone, but now their own circle is turning on them for attacking the innocent, proving that while a lie has speed, the truth has endurance. You are witnessing a strategic unraveling, where those who once nodded along to a false narrative are now falling silent, leaving the liars exposed and deeply uncomfortable. The energy has shifted permanently because the ending was written in your favor long before the first rumor was ever whispered, before the lie was ever told, before your name was ever placed in anyone's mouth. Something was already happening. You were becoming something powerful. You were growing into something that could not be ignored. You were carrying yourself with a kind of peace and consistency that made certain people deeply uncomfortable. Your growth, your refusal to shrink, your uncompromising commitment to your own integrity, that is what started all of this. Understand this clearly. Nobody builds a campaign against someone who poses no threat. Nobody mobilizes an entire circle to destroy someone they are not afraid of. The level of energy directed at your name is a direct measurement of how much your presence disrupted someone else's comfort. You were not targeted because you were nothing. You were targeted because you were something that could not be controlled, could not be corrupted, and could not be beaten on a fair field. So the fair field was abandoned. The attack went underground, ear to ear, whisper to whisper, carrying an invented version of you. That version was made small enough to fit their comfort, damaged enough to neutralize your influence, and broken enough to justify their need to break you first. But here is the detail they missed, and it is the detail that changes everything. You cannot successfully lie about someone whose life contradicts the lie every single day. You cannot tell people someone is unstable when that person keeps showing up steady. You cannot convince people someone lacks integrity when every direct encounter with that person proves otherwise. The lie had an expiration date the moment you were chosen as the target, because your life was already the rebuttal. The liar was arguing against evidence that could not be erased. The attack was not proof that you were weak. It was proof that you were undeniable. You were lied about because the truth about you was too dangerous for someone to let stand unchallenged. Hold that. We will return to it. Watch what was actually done. Watch the mechanics of it. Because this is where the trap was built, and it was built by the one who set it. An audience was gathered. The false account was delivered with timing, with emotion, with just enough detail to feel credible. The performance landed well, and a performance that lands well feels like power. The circle rallied, the narrative spread, and in those early days there was something intoxicating in controlling what people believed about you, that sensation of manufactured authority over someone else's reputation. That kind of control is a drug. And like every drug, it demands a higher dose next time, just to maintain the same feeling. So the liar kept going. Details were added. The false account was retold. Your name was kept alive in conversations where it had no business appearing. The narrative was always circulating, always refreshed, always current. And what the liar did not realize, what was completely invisible from inside the performance, is that every single retelling was spending something that could never be earned back. It was spending credibility, trust, and the quiet respect of people who were paying far closer attention than they were ever allowed to show. Here is what every person in that circle was doing, whether they were conscious of it or not. They were watching the liar's relationship with the truth. They were cataloging every exaggeration, every inconsistency between what was said one week and what was said the next, every moment where the emotion in the account felt less like genuine pain and more like strategy, every time the performance required a new detail, a new grievance, or a new dramatic element to stay convincing. The observation was being quietly filed away. Nobody announces when they stop trusting someone. They simply get quieter. They smile a little less freely. They choose their words a little more carefully. And the liar, too deep in the performance to notice the temperature dropping, kept talking, kept spending, and kept burning through credibility that had already run dry. That is the first layer of the trap. The liar believed they were building a case against you. They were building a case against themselves. one statement at a time, in front of observers who were paying far more attention than they ever let on. Every person who heard the lie also absorbed something underneath the words, not the content, but the energy behind it, the hunger in it, the compulsive need for an enemy to function, the unmistakable signature of someone who requires a target to feel powerful. Once that energy registered, a question began forming in the minds of everyone listening. It was never spoken aloud, but it was there, running in the background of every nod, every expression of agreement, and every act of performed solidarity. If this was done to that person, what happens when it gets done to me? That question is everything. It is the seed of the entire unraveling. The moment that question takes root, loyalty transforms into calculation. People stop following out of genuine belief, and they start following because they are managing their own exposure. They begin performing loyalty the same way the liar was performing righteousness, as a survival strategy, not a real choice. A circle held together by fear is not a circle. It is a hostage arrangement. People will remain in that arrangement exactly as long as leaving feels more dangerous than staying. The moment the math shifts, the moment they can see the liar's influence weakening, the fabrication fraying, and others already quietly stepping back, the exits fill rapidly. That math was always going to shift, because it was built on sand. The group was bound together by anxiety, dressed as loyalty, and anxiety dissolves the moment conditions change. Here is the thing about attacking the innocent. Your character, clean, consistent, undisturbed, functioned as a constant comparison the liar could not control. Every day that you kept moving with your integrity intact, people in that circle were quietly measuring what they were told about you against what they could observe directly, and the measurements were never going to land in the liar's favor. You cannot destroy a mirror by lying in front of it. The reflection does not negotiate, does not take bribes, and does not get tired. Your character was that mirror. It showed the truth about you every single day, and in doing so, it revealed the truth about everyone standing in front of it. If you felt called by this message, hype this video so other chosen ones like you can be reached. Anyone who uses social warfare as a strategy depends on one critical assumption, that the people nearby are too absorbed in the drama to notice what is actually happening to them. The assumption is that the audience is passive and that no one is running the same critical analysis on the attacker that the attacker is running on the target. That assumption is always wrong. The most perceptive people in that circle, the ones who have seen enough of life to recognize manipulation when it is operating directly in front of them, were not only watching you, they were watching the liar. They were watching how the account was being managed, and how quickly new targets got introduced to the narrative whenever momentum around your name began fading. What they were watching gradually took shape as a pattern. Patterns do not lie, even when the person creating them does. Recognition arrived quietly, but thoroughly. The most aware people began connecting what they were told about you to every previous account they had ever received from this person about someone else. The former close connection, who was labeled dangerous, the family member painted as jealous, the colleague dismissed as a threat. Every prior target began to look different under the new light that your situation cast. The picture that formed was damning, not because anyone said anything explicitly, but because the pattern had become impossible to deny. What was done to you was not a single lapse in judgment. It was a method. It was a feature of how this person operates when they feel threatened or outpaced by someone they cannot control. Once the circle recognized that truly recognized it, in the deep way that cannot be reversed, the loyalty was not just weakened, it was erased retroactively. People were not simply pulling away from the present, they were quietly revising their entire history of trust with this person. That is not a crack in a foundation, that is the foundation being condemned. You've probably noticed, a lot of Chosen One channels on YouTube have stopped publishing, videos pulled, voices silenced. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice. That's exactly why I'm putting you onto something real, Destiny Engine. I built this because I was done watching chosen ones get dragged through betrayal, isolation, and attacks, while their enemies strutted around unchecked. I want to help you accelerate the speed of your divine justice and step fully into your purpose. And the beauty of it, you don't even have to lift a finger. Destiny Engine takes their downfall and flips it into your rise. This isn't another meditation app. It's declassified consciousness technology, the same mind programming tools your enemies once used to install fear, competition and scarcity, re-engineered to restore your sovereignty and align you with the cooperative, upgraded operating framework. It generates personalized sequences mapped to your divine purpose. The hardest thing you'll do is put on headphones, press play, and watch your enemies keep digging their own grave. Join Destiny Engine to support your favorite channels and use it for your own rise. It's a 360 win. Start your Destiny Engine for $7 today and turn everything they did to break you into fuel for your rise. Link in the description. The lie was not spread quietly, it was celebrated. The liar did not just damage your name, they elevated themselves in the process, positioning the attack as courage, as righteousness, as the willingness to say what others would not. The false account became a personal brand. It became a truth-teller's identity and a claim to authority in the circle. That branding was the most catastrophic mistake they could have made. The moment anyone declares themselves a truth-teller, they become subject to truth-telling standards. Every word they speak from that point forward is measured against what actually occurred. And when the circle finally began looking with a critical eye, the eye they had never bothered to use before, the account did not hold up. Details had shifted too many times. The promised evidence never materialized. The emotional performance was too practiced, too polished and too smooth to be genuine. Real pain has rough edges. Manufactured pain is suspiciously consistent. And then the most quietly devastating thing happened. Your life kept moving. You kept going. Not frantically, not defensively, not in the scrambling way of someone managing a guilty conscience. You simply moved forward, clean and consistent, building and demonstrating exactly who you had always presented yourself to be, every single day, in ways that people could witness directly. That was the trap closing. One version of you was delivered through the liar's account. Another version, the real one, unedited and unperformed, was being demonstrated by your life simultaneously. Every person in that circle had access to both versions at the same time. They could hear the accusation and observe the evidence and draw their own conclusions. They drew them, and those conclusions are exactly why the circle is fracturing right now. Truth does not argue with a lie. Truth simply keeps showing up, and it has, and it will. Watch what happens inside a circle when the common target is no longer available as fuel. Your name was the foundation of that group's unity. The shared contempt for you was the bonding agent. Every gathering, every private exchange, every moment of manufactured closeness in that circle had your name underneath it somewhere as the load-bearing element. That is not community. That is a coalition, and coalitions collapse the moment the objective loses momentum, the moment you refuse to react, refuse to retaliate, and refuse to play the character the liar's script required. The fuel dried up. Energy without a target does not disappear. It redirects. It went into the circle itself. The tensions that had been masked by the shared focus on you suddenly had no mask. The quiet competitions, the buried resentments, and the rivalries between people who were never genuine allies all surfaced at once. And the liar, who had been running everything from the center, suddenly found the circle applying to them the exact same scrutiny that had been reserved for you. Consider the precision of that outcome. The interrogation that was built for you came home. The damage to the liar's standing is permanent for one specific reason. People in that circle did not just lose trust in this person. They lost the internal picture they had constructed about who this person was, the whole sense of what this person stood for and why they were worth following. That picture does not get rebuilt once it shatters. People do not reconstruct broken images of those they once trusted. They move on from them. The identity the liar projected was a costume, and the costume is now off. What is underneath is something no one in that circle wants to remain close to, not out of hatred, but because proximity to exposed fraud carries its own consequences. Here is something that does not get acknowledged enough about what you were doing during all of this, even in the moments when you thought you were doing nothing. Every day that you stayed grounded, you were setting a standard, not intentionally, not as a calculated strategy. You were simply being who you are, consistently, in full view of the same people who had been told you were something else entirely. And standards, once established, are merciless to anything that cannot meet them. People in that circle were watching two things simultaneously. They were watching the liar maintain a campaign that required constant energy, constant management, and constant new fuel to keep moving. And they were watching you refuse to participate in any campaign at all. One of those demonstrations demanded everything from the person sustaining it. The other required nothing except your continued existence as yourself. In the contrast between those two approaches, a verdict was forming long before anyone named it aloud. You were not campaigning for your own vindication. You were not positioning yourself or making strategic moves. You were simply living, and your life was conducting its own audit of everything that had been said about you. Every interaction someone had with you that did not match the false account became another data point against that account. Every demonstration of the character you were accused of lacking became another crack in the credibility of the accusation. Every day you kept moving with peace and purpose was another day the lie aged poorly while your life aged well. That is a form of power that cannot be faked and cannot be taken away. Manufactured influence requires constant maintenance, but the authority that comes from genuine character only grows. That authority has been growing this entire time, quietly and beneath all the noise, preparing for exactly this moment when the noise finally stops, and what remains is simply the truth of who you are. Volume was mistaken for power. The belief was that if enough people heard the account, it would become indisputable through sheer repetition. In the short term, that calculation felt correct. The crowd was assembled, the narrative was loud, and the sense of being untouchable was real for a moment. But crowds are not passive. Crowds contain individuals, and individuals, even when temporarily swept up in a compelling narrative, eventually step back and ask the question that every serious accusation demands: does this hold up? Does it match what I have personally witnessed? Does the evidence actually support what is being claimed, or is the emotional energy of the performance doing the work that real evidence should be doing? One by one, person by person, the assembled crowd stopped functioning as an audience and became something far more dangerous for the liar, a jury. Not officially, not publicly, but in the private judgment of individual conscience, which is the only verdict that ultimately shapes behavior, people were deliberating. They were comparing the version they were sold against the version your life kept demonstrating, and conclusions were being reached. False testimony always requires ongoing witnesses. The liar needed people to keep vouching for the account, but as the account aged without evidence to sustain it, the vouching grew quieter. Endorsements became vague. People who had once repeated the narrative began inserting distance, saying only what they had been told, and making clear they had no personal knowledge. Nobody wants to be the final person still defending a fabrication after the fabrication has been fully exposed. Here is the precision of what happened next. The crowd that was recruited as protection became the most significant threat the liar faces. Every person who witnessed the lie and now sees it clearly is a liability the liar never anticipated. Every person who repeated the false account and now feels the burn of having been manipulated has strong motivation to create distance, and distance inside a social circle is contagious. The protection became the exposure. The assembled audience became the verdict. The people in that circle have been going backward, not literally, but mentally. They have been replaying every account this person ever gave them about someone else, every dramatic separation that was framed as someone else's fault, every person who was labeled dangerous or toxic and then quietly disappeared from the group, every instance of someone being painted as a threat to the liar's well-being, only to vanish without any of the predicted consequences ever materializing. How many of those prior targets were simply earlier versions of you? How many innocent people never got the honest hearing they deserved because the circle was too comfortable accepting the narrative being handed to them? This is the weight that patterns carry. A single incident can be forgiven as error, as poor judgment, or as a bad season. But a pattern is not an incident. A pattern is a methodology. A pattern reveals what someone consistently reaches for when they feel outpaced, threatened, or unwilling to do the work of genuine growth. And the pattern is now visible in a way that cannot be unseen, and visible to the exact people the liar depended on most. What follows is not dramatic. It is quiet, and it is thorough. The people who participated in the attack, who nodded along, repeated the account, and lent their presence to the campaign against you, are now sitting with the weight of their own complicity. They do not just need separation from the liar. They need separation from their own participation in what was done to you. And the fastest path to that is positioning themselves against the person who drew them in. The most enthusiastic former supporters become the most motivated critics. The circle that was supposed to protect the liar becomes the mechanism of exposure. The information everyone was given in confidence is now being held with entirely different intentions. You did not survive this. You dominated it. Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters enormously. Surviving implies you barely made it through. Dominating means you controlled the outcome without ever appearing to exert effort. That is exactly what occurred. While enormous energy was being spent on maintaining the lie, managing growing doubts, performing for shifting audiences, and scrambling to keep a fabricated account credible, you were doing something exponentially more powerful. You were simply being yourself, consistent, grounded, undisturbed, and exactly who you said you were, every day, without exception. Do not let anyone call that passive. It takes more discipline to remain calm under a false accusation than it takes to explode. It takes more strength to trust the truth to work on its own timeline than to force a confrontation. It takes more genuine power to refuse the character that was written for you, to decline being the reactive, defensive, spiraling villain that the fabrication required as its counterpart, than it does to step into that character and validate every claim they made. You denied them the ending. Without your reaction, their account had no conclusion. It ran on its own momentum until it ran out of energy, until the people listening started exchanging glances, until questions started forming, until reality did what it reliably does, arrived unannounced, undeniable, and deeply inconvenient for everyone who had placed a bet against you. Your composure was not a sign of indifference. It was the most precise strategic position you could have taken. Your peace became their problem. Every day that you were not spiraling, not retaliating, not providing the reaction needed to justify the scale of the attack, was another day the fabrication had to sustain itself alone. Fabrications cannot sustain themselves alone. They never could, because they need reaction to survive. You gave them nothing, and nothing is exactly what they were left with. You did not just weather the storm, you watched it exhaust itself, and then you kept walking. Here is the principle that anchors everything we have walked through, the law operating underneath all of it. When you go after the innocent, you do not simply create conflict with another person. You open a debt with something far larger than either of you. There is a moral architecture operating beneath every human situation, consistent, reliable, and completely indifferent to how convincing the performance was. The most dependable feature of that architecture is this: injustice does not stay buried. It surfaces. It must. That surfacing is intrinsic to what injustice is. Every lie told about you was a withdrawal from an account that was never owned by the one making withdrawals. Every person manipulated against you was a transaction that registered somewhere beyond what anyone could see in the moment. Every night you carried the weight of being falsely accused was registered too. Nothing went unrecorded, and the balance is now due. This is not abstract language. It is observable cause and effect. The way trust operates, the way social dynamics shift under sustained dishonesty, and the way patterns surface over time, all function together as a delivery system for consequence. No dramatic intervention is required. A liar eventually contradicts themselves under the weight of their own invention. A manipulator eventually overplays their hand in front of the wrong audience. A circle constructed on fear eventually collapses from the inside when the fear loses its grip. These are not occasional outcomes. These are rules. You are the person who held your character through the full duration of that pressure, who refused to become what you were accused of being, who kept showing up as living, breathing evidence against the fabrication. That means you were not just enduring the process. You were the process. Your consistency was the mechanism through which the truth stayed alive long enough to arrive. Your refusal to break was what kept the account open until the balance came due. This was never only your battle, it was always operating at a scale larger than the personal. You were simply the one who held position while justice took the time it needed. Something is happening right now that will not be announced and will not be reported anywhere. But if you understand what to listen for, you can hear it with precision. The silence among those people has shifted. It used to carry a different quality, the comfortable quiet of shared knowledge, the satisfaction of collective secrecy. People knew what had been said about you, and they knew who believed it. Sitting inside that shared knowing felt like warmth, like solidarity, like being on the right side of something. That silence had a texture of confidence behind it. The silence now is something else entirely. It is the quiet of people who are calculating, watching each other, and wondering who will be the first to acknowledge what everyone is already thinking privately. It is the silence of a group that has collectively noticed something they cannot put back. That kind of silence is not comfortable. It is pressurized. It signals that the real conversation has moved beneath the surface, and beneath the surface conversations are where manufactured loyalty goes to end. That beneath the surface conversation begins small and quiet. One person expresses vague uncertainty to another, something like, "Things have just felt different lately," and the other person, who has been sitting with the exact same uncertainty, leans in, and then it flows, not as an outburst but as honest relief. People have been holding these questions without permission to ask them out loud. The details that never quite aligned, the account about you that kept changing shape over time, all of it becomes speakable the moment one person decides to speak it. And here is what is not being said about you in those conversations. Your name is not the subject anymore. The lie is not being repeated. What is being examined is how everyone got drawn into carrying a fabrication and who handed them that fabrication in the first place. You have been replaced as the subject of the discussion. The subject now is the person who made you the subject. That is the turning. That is exactly what it looks like when a circle stops functioning as a weapon and starts functioning as a witness. Watch the liar right now, because exhaustion has a recognizable quality, and that quality is on full display. Sustaining a false account at the scale this one was sustained against you requires enormous ongoing expenditure. Every new interaction is a performance that must be managed. Every conversation requires deciding how much of the original account still holds up, what needs to be quietly adjusted, and how to keep everything consistent across different audiences who compare notes in ways that cannot always be tracked. Every person who asks a direct question becomes a potential exposure point. That is not a light burden to carry. It is a full-time occupation, and it cannot be maintained indefinitely without the cracks becoming visible to everyone watching. You will notice, if you have not already, that the energy being brought to the campaign against you has fundamentally changed in character. The urgency has left. The sharp, righteous fire that animated the early stages of the attack has dulled into something that looks like maintenance-level obligation. It no longer looks like conviction. It looks like someone keeping a chore going, because abandoning it would be its own form of admission. That shift happens when a fabrication exhausts its emotional fuel, when the charge behind the lie has been fully spent, and what remains is the mechanical requirement of keeping the account alive. The performance is no longer of righteousness. It is the performance of someone managing their own exposure. Everyone in that circle can feel the difference in energy, even those who cannot put words to what they are sensing. Tired bitterness does not inspire allegiance. It inspires discomfort, then pity, then quiet withdrawal. Nobody wants to remain permanently beside someone whose entire public identity has collapsed into defending a position that fewer and fewer people believe anymore. The isolation that follows is not the result of any confrontation. It is the result of ordinary people making ordinary calculations about where they want to place their energy and their association. You did not have to engineer any of this. Exhaustion did the work. Truth did the work. The sheer weight of a sustained fabrication against someone who simply refused to cooperate with it did the work. You only had to remain yourself long enough for all of it to arrive at the same time. Before the first word was spoken against you, before the first ear received the fabrication, there was already a truth about you that made the outcome of all this inevitable. Not the attack, the outcome. The kind of character that attracts an attack of this magnitude is the same kind of character that cannot be permanently damaged by a lie. The assault and the vindication are not opposites. They are two expressions of the same underlying fact about who you are. Consider what was actually underneath the fear that drove all of this, not what was said about you, but what was felt about you. Your peace was threatening because it exposed someone else's disorder. Your consistency was threatening because it highlighted someone else's instability. The forward momentum of your life was threatening because it demonstrated that growth requires real internal work, work that the person who attacked you had been actively avoiding. Rather than face that, rather than be transformed by the discomfort of standing near someone who was doing the work they were not doing, an attempt was made to remove you from visibility entirely. The lie was never about justice. It was about fear wearing the costume of justice. Someone afraid of what you carry, desperate to neutralize it before it made their own deficits impossible to ignore, chose attack over growth. And that choice is the fullest possible confirmation of your significance. You do not fear what is beneath you. You do not organize a full social campaign to destroy what is already irrelevant. The scale of what was mobilized against you is the precise measurement of the threat that your presence represented, and the threat you represented is a direct reflection of your power. Let that land without deflection. Let yourself receive it fully. Do not let the memory of the attack make you doubt yourself. Let it serve as permanent evidence that before you were ever publicly vindicated, you were already privately significant enough to be feared. The attack did not reveal your weakness. Your response to it revealed your nature, steady, sovereign, and unbroken. That is the response of someone who already knows exactly who they are and requires no permission from anyone to keep being it. Your name was lied about to everyone who would listen. A crowd was assembled around the fabrication and called a verdict. Witnesses were gathered and called evidence. Manufactured grievance was performed as righteousness, and for a season it appeared it might work, that the speed of the lie might outrun the endurance of the truth, that the assembled crowd might hold long enough to do permanent damage to everything you had built. Look at what actually happened instead. The crowd has dispersed. The witnesses are creating distance from what they once vouched for. The performance has revealed the performer. The circle is splitting along every seam that was supposed to hold it together permanently, and you, the person this entire operation was designed to destroy, are still here, still intact, clearer than before the attack began, more defined, more undeniable, because that is what fire does to gold. It does not destroy gold, it burns away everything that was not gold to begin with. The attack did not diminish you, it distilled you. It removed every ambiguity about your character, not because you argued your case out loud, but because you lived it consistently, and a character that has been lived under maximum pressure is the only kind of evidence that survives indefinitely. One irreversible mistake was made against you. A target was chosen whose life was the rebuttal to every accusation. A fabrication was constructed that reality was going to contradict every single day without end. A long game was started against someone who was built for the long game, and the result is exactly what was always going to be the result. A fractured circle, spent credibility, an exposed pattern, and a reputation permanently marked by what it was willing to do to the innocent. And here you are, still building, still moving, still being exactly who you were before any of this started, but now carrying the kind of authority that only comes from being tested at maximum pressure and refusing to bend. That is not survival, that is dominion. A lie has speed, the truth has endurance. And you, chosen one, you are the endurance. You always were. All of this simply made sure that everyone now knows it, including you. Now walk like it.